Good evening, everyone. Please open your Bibles with me in the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 to 23. Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 to 23, but we will only read 1 up to verse 16. Matthew 2, 1 to 23, that's our text for this evening, but our reading would only end at verse 16. It says here, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they said to him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea. For this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search carefully for the child. And when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him.' After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. After coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. Now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him.' So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod, and this was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi." May the good Lord bless the reading of his word. Yesterday, I officiated a wedding ceremony. And every time I do such a ceremony, I get the chance to recall my own wedding day when I was wedded to my wife. You know, at the very beginning part of it, there was a little bit of a struggle because both of us are eldest among the siblings. She is the eldest in their home, and I am the eldest in our home among the siblings. She makes decision in behalf of her siblings. I make decision in behalf of my siblings. I lead my siblings to do things in the home. She does as well in their respective home. And when we came together, we brought those kinds of experiences. And it's a struggle. Well, not only in marriages, but it's a reality that when there are two authorities or influence that would collide on each other and nobody would yield, a struggle would really take place. One has to give in. One has to yield to the other. Else, there is going to be a struggle. If you look at one of the main characters in the story that we are looking at right now, Herod was troubled. He was struggling when this news came to him. And the author of the Bible, of this part of the scriptures, is very careful in crafting this story, presenting it in a way that a tension is built up right at the very beginning of the verse. If you look at verse 1, how was Herod introduced in the text? It says there, in the days of Herod the king. Take note where the definite article is placed. It was not placed before the name Herod. It was placed before the title king. Meaning to say, when this is crafted this way, the emphasis within the statement is on the position, the word king. Because if the author doesn't like to emphasize the position, then probably he could have written it King Herod. But in the way he wrote it down, Herod the king. The emphasis now falls on the position of Herod. And it was stated that way. That kind of statement isn't only giving us the time when Jesus was born, but the historian was telling us about the emphasis of the statement, which is the position itself. Why? Because he was trying to introduce something that would relate to the tension, to the struggle that will happen later. In verse 2, the Magi arrived in Jerusalem. And the Magi had an inquiry to Herod and his people. The question that they asked to him was, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Take note that Herod is the king of the land of Judea. And now these Magi arrive and asking, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? What's the problem with that? What's the big deal with that, Herod? That's truly a big deal. Because the statement of the Magi, where is he who has been born King of the Jews, okay lang sana if king of another place. But who are these Jews and what place is this Judea? Literally, when you look at that place where Herod was reigning over, it was given to him by the Roman Empire under the authority of Caesar. Caesar was the greater king, and he gave that place to Herod for him to dominate and to lead and to control, but he is under the power of the Roman Empire. And so, if you think about that place called Judea, where Herod reigned, majority, if not all of the people living in that place back then were Jews. And so when the Magi asked him, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? They were actually telling him, where is he who is going to take your place? And politically, Herod was alarmed about this matter because this is not just an ordinary king who is able to gain the role that he would be taking or the position that he would be putting himself in. But this guy that was born is born King of the Jews. The way it was stated relates the idea that this babe that was born has a royal lineage. That he did not earn his kingship, but when he was born, by nature, he is king because he has a royal lineage. And no wonder, if you look at the Gospel of Matthew, by the way, Matthew, in a very peculiar manner, presented Jesus different from how the other Gospel writers presented him. You look at the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are all talking about Jesus and his ministry. But you look at their writings, they have a different presentation of Jesus. These are not a contradiction, but these are complementing to each other. It's like they wrote about a person from different perspectives or angle. All of the writings were right and correct, but they wrote it from the different perspectives or different point of view or vantage point. Matthew wrote about Jesus, presenting him as king of the kingdom of God. That's the main theme of Matthew. In contrast to Mark, who wrote the book of Mark, presenting Jesus as the servant of all. So Matthew presented him as king, and as if it's in the other side of the spectrum that Mark wrote about Jesus. He is the servant. No wonder the key verse of the book of Mark is the verse that says, "For Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve." Because he presented Christ as a servant. You look at the book of Luke. Luke presented Jesus as the Son of Man, focusing on his humanity. But you look at the book of John, right at the very first verse of the first chapter of the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And you look further, this word is pertaining to Jesus himself. In other words, John presented Jesus in his deity. He is God. So you look at these four Gospels. Matthew presented him as king. Mark presented him as a servant. Luke presented him as man. And then John presented him as God. The different presentations of Jesus in the four different Gospels. Looking at Matthew now, the very text that we are considering, Matthew presented Jesus somebody with a royal lineage, a king who did not earn his kingship, but a king who by nature came from a royal lineage. No wonder if you look at Matthew chapter 1 verse 1, it talks about the genealogy of Jesus, and Jesus was traced back going towards the past in the person of David, the greatest king of Israel. And then they trace it back to David. You know why? Because you look at the earlier writings in the Old Testament, in the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, God made a statement to David, "David, your kingdom shall not come to an end. You have shown favor to your people, and I am showing favor to you because you have gained what I want to show to you out of the respect, out of the obedience, out of the devotion that you have for me. Then I am telling you this, your kingdom will be forever." And when the declaration about the kingdom of David will be forever, it has to do with his lineage. David died. His son Solomon, who reigned after him, died. Solomon also died. The next kings over Israel, all of them died. But somebody is going to come, coming from your line. Meaning, the line of your kingship will stay forever. Because at the end of it, the one that will come from your line is no other than the Messiah himself. Jesus was introduced by Matthew that way. And so when Herod heard this, "Where is he who has been born king of the Jews?" he was alarmed. Because they were inquiring about someone who's going to take his place. Now let's look at the response of Herod. The progression of his response. The first thing that Herod did, in verse 4, he called the priests or the chief priests and the scribes of the people. For what? He inquired from them about the exact place where this Messiah will be born or was born. Okay? Kasi ang statement ng mga Magi, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" Meaning to say, Jesus was born already right at that moment when they were inquiring from Herod. Oh, by the way, I told you this before, but just in case you forgot about it. The Bible doesn't talk about three kings. After New Year, there is still an observation of further, what is this? It's like an extension of the Christmas season. It's observed to remember the three kings. But it's not biblical. Why not biblical when there are three figures in the scriptures? No, that's not true as well. The Bible doesn't say if there were three who visited Jesus. And the Bible said they were Magi. The Bible doesn't say that they were kings. Magi are not kings, okay? Magi are translated wise men. They were not kings. So when you think of three kings, where did those three come from? The most probable reason behind the three, which I could think, are the gifts that they presented later. They presented three kinds of gifts. Then probably some Bible interpreters look at it as representing each of them. Then that's why they said 3 kings. May pangalan pa. Diba? One is Melchor, Gaspar, and I forgot the other one. But that's not biblical. The Bible doesn't mention 3 kings, and the Bible doesn't even mention the number 3. We only know that it's more than one because of the word magi. What's the singular for the word magi? Magus. So the Bible uses the term magi, meaning to say there were more than one. And it doesn't say about 3. So when the magi arrived in Jerusalem, Jesus was born already. And it's a myth to think that they arrived on the same night that Jesus was born. Because if you look at the descriptions here, they came from the east. You go at the border of Israel, beyond the border of Israel towards the east, it's a vast desert. And you push forward, you may reach either Persia or Babylon area. And if these 3 came from either of those countries that I have mentioned, probably it would take them, it's going to be around 900 miles of travel. So if they saw the star and they started traveling, you cannot travel that long for that short period walking in a caravan. It cannot be. So if you look at the story, how it was arranged in the scriptures, it's impossible for them to reach Jerusalem. So the most probable thing is that they arrived there after the birth of Jesus already. Now what about the Belen that we have here? You see the Belen that is very known as portrayed in Hollywood this time. You can see the baby Jesus, Mary and Joseph were there standing right beside him. And then there are the 3 magi and then the shepherds. These are like putting all the scenes in the scriptures together. Scenes that happened in different time, they were placed together to represent one figure. But if you break it down in the biblical account, it could not be. The shepherds probably could be there on that same night when Jesus was born. Why did I say that? The shepherd's field is less than 5 kilometers from the village of Bethlehem. Less than 5 kilometers. If you visit Israel this time, both of these places are inside West Bank. Okay? You can just run from the shepherd's field to Bethlehem. So if an angel appeared to the shepherds telling them, the baby is born, and then they left the field and ran towards the place where Jesus was born, they could be there on that same night, but not for the Magi. So if you think about the visitation of the shepherds, it is correct. You think about the visitation of the Magi, it is correct. But did they come to the same place together at the same time? Not possible. Except if the star appeared to them earlier than the birth of Jesus and they started walking and arrived in that place right at the same evening when Jesus was born. That's the only possibility. So it's a myth to think about these figures together brought in one scenario. But the Magi arrived there and gave this inquiry to Herod, and Herod was alarmed. No wonder if you look at this response of Herod in verse 3, the king heard this and he was troubled, and the rest of Jerusalem. They were alarmed. They were struggling. Herod was struggling himself. And so he called for the chief priests and the scribes to inquire from them, where is this baby born? And based on the prophecy, they responded to him. The more it became alarming to Herod when he found out that it is prophesied in the Old Testament already. Why is it alarming for them? The people back then were so acquainted about prophecies. They knew their history in the Old Testament. God sent a prophet and told them that in the coming days this is going to happen. And then they experienced what was prophesied. It became a reality. So for several times in the past, a prophet was sent. It prophesied about a thing in the future. The future came. It took place. It happened. It became real. So for them, whatever is prophesied as sent by God as a message to a prophet, it will happen. And Herod, hearing that this is a byproduct of a prophecy, then he was even more alarmed. He wanted to know where the babe was born. And then they said, out of the prophecy that we know, it's in Bethlehem. Now he knows where the exact place is. After which, after he called the high priest and the scribes, he called the next set of individuals. Who were they? The Magi. He called the Magi secretly. Why secretly? Because he had a plan. This was not a surprise. He had an evil plan. And he told the Magi, when did you see the star? Okay. The first query that he asked from the chief priest and the scribe, where? The place. He gathered, he called the Magi. The next question that he asked, when? Because if you want to trace someone, you have to ask these two questions. When and where? So after this, he asked the Magi, when did you see the star? And they told him about it. And he said, okay, you go and find him. Once you found him, you come back to me. Tell it to me so that I may go and worship him as well. It was a lie, a total lie. He just wanted to know the exact place where the baby is so that he can go and destroy his rival. This was a struggle for Herod. Why? Because he thinks that Jesus is going to take his place. When two authorities would come and they will collide and nobody will yield, there is a struggle. Herod struggled with this announcement. He really was disturbed about this news that he received from the Magi. And the Magi went on and found Jesus, and they worshiped him and offered to him the gifts that I mentioned to you became the basis for the number 3 of the claim to be kings, who are actually Magi. They gave their gifts, and having been warned by God through an angel, they took a different route going back to their own country. And Herod wondered why they did not go back. And because he was struggling already, he made a decision, the third call that he made. First, he called the chief priests and the scribes to inquire where the baby is born. Second, he called the Magi to know the exact time. Third was very tragic. He called for the slaughtering of the babies 2-year-old below in Bethlehem. This guy was struggling. And out of his struggle, he made a decision calling that babies, male babies, 2-year-old below in Bethlehem, shall be slaughtered. This gives us the idea that the Magi left already, and for quite some time. This didn't happen in one night. Okay? Many times we think that all of this took place in one night. That Jesus was born, the shepherd received the announcements of the angel, and they went to the birthplace of Jesus, and the Magi saw the star, they started walking, and at the same night they arrived at the place of Jesus, and then Herod at the same night ordered that the babies will be slaughtered. No, it's not like that. It happened in a long period. And most probably, this earlier part of the narrative in the book of Matthew happened for about 2 years. No wonder Herod ordered that male babies 2 years and below in Bethlehem shall be slaughtered. After this, when the Magi escaped, Joseph as well received an instruction from God, telling him, Joseph, leave this place, for Herod is going to come. Joseph left and brought his family to Egypt, right at that dawn. And then, they stayed in Egypt for quite long as well. Herod continued reigning. after slaughtering the babies. He continued reigning, and then after his reign, he died. He was replaced by his son, Archelaus. This time, Joseph received an instruction again from God. Joseph, bring back your family to Israel. Joseph struggled. Why? Because he was afraid. Why was he afraid? Because he was thinking the reigning king is Archelaus, the son of Herod. Probably he's going to do the same as his father did. But because God told him so, he proceeded with God's instruction. So it was not a prolonged struggle. Because after all, he obeyed God, and so he went back to Israel and decided to live in Nazareth, to fulfill also what was prophesied, that the Son of God will be called a Nazarene. That's why when he was crucified, it tells there, Yesu Nazareno. Okay? The I-N at the beginning of INRI, I is Yesu, N is Nazareno. So if you look at it, Jesus was brought to Nazareth and lived his childhood days there, but Joseph obeyed God. Now here is the thing. Herod had a struggle, and he struggled a lot for a long period. Why such a struggle? Because there was another authority that came into his place, and it was a coalition of the authority of two kings, King Herod and King Jesus. It was a struggle for him because he cannot let go of his position. It was a struggle for him because he cannot let go of his own decision and of his will. Because he finds it so hard, I believe, to submit to someone else who is a Jew. Because the Jewish people were under him. So there was a coalition of authorities and power in the way the narrative was related. But not a struggle so much for Joseph. Why? Because Joseph knew who is the authority. He knew at the very beginning that God is the authority. When he was betrothed to Mary, he found out that Mary was pregnant. He even didn't touch her yet. And so he planned of divorcing with her, and God told him, don't do that. And Joseph obeyed. Now that they were married, God told him, escape to Egypt. Joseph just obeyed. In Egypt, God told him, you go back to Israel. He just went back to Israel despite the fear that he felt. Why was the decision quite quicker for him and did not have much of a struggle? Reality is that Joseph knew who is the authority. He knew that his authority is God. And that's the difference between him and Herod. Herod perceived himself as the ultimate authority. And this is not an isolated case. You know, Bible readers in our time would easily see and point it as, why did Herod respond that way? Doesn't he know Jesus? He has an idea about Jesus. He knew that Jesus is a byproduct of the Old Testament prophecy. He knew that Jesus is an ordinary person. But why did he react that way? It's so easy to question the reaction of Herod. But don't you know that it's also a struggle of many people today, especially believers. This is not a struggle of the unbelievers because they don't care about God. But for believers, it's a struggle. If you think that you still have the authority over yourself. As far as authority and influence is concerned, there are three main categories of this on the earth. One is what they call the theonomos. Theo means God, nomos means law. Theonomos, God is the final authority, and he tells the people which one is good and which one is bad. Another kind of idea of authority and influence has to do with what they call heteronomos. There is an external factor that dictates as to what shall be done and what is good and what is right and what is wrong. So if you think of nations that are reigned by few individuals, and the few individuals would dictate to the people, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. That's heteronomos. There is an external factor that influences the people. But one that is very common worldwide today is what we call autonomous. Auto means self. Nomos means law. So when we say an autonomous car, the car is capable of navigating by itself through the internet. Autonomous. We think oftentimes that we are autonomous being even when we are believers already. But don't you know that as believers, we shall shift from thinking that we are an autonomous person to a theonomous person. Because once we become followers of Jesus, we follow what Christ said in the Garden of Gethsemane. When He said, if you can remove this cup from me, but not my will, but yours be done. It is not my will, but yours be done. It is a theonomous way of life that Jesus was trying to exemplify. Christians would always find themselves in a struggling moment if we remain in an autonomous concept of authority. When we think that we are the ruler of ourselves, yes, we may not be kings over a group of people, but we feel and we consider ourselves oftentimes as a king over our life. That's why there is a struggle. Shall I go to the church and have a fellowship with the believers? If you follow a theonomous kind of influence in your life, the answer is clear. God wants all of us to fellowship with each other. So it must not be a question. But why do we question, shall I go to church? Why? Because at some point in life, we think that we are theonomous, but at some point as well, we follow an autonomous concept, that we rule ourselves. Is it difficult to make a decision whether to lie or not? Supposedly, it is not, if we think that we are governed by God. But since we think we are governing ourselves, then we struggle. Because as believers, we have the Spirit of God who tells us, you must follow what God tells you to do. Not my will, but yours. And yet, deep within our hearts, we think that we are the ruler of our lives. And we say, I want this. You know, oftentimes, our decisions is based on our preference. Our decisions are based on our wants and desires. And there are even times that we don't even ask God, Lord, what do you want? Because at the end of the day, the problem of Herod is still fresh in our society today. Herod struggled because it's a coalition of authorities, King Jesus or King Herod. But it's not an isolated reality, because we struggle with a similar situation today. Is it King Jesus or King JR, if I look at myself? But if I live with a theonomous concept of authority in my life, I would submit to God. Who am I? I am only a sinner saved by grace. And my authority shall be the King of Kings who came to this world and died for me. He is the reigning King, and He shall reign over us. Now, let me leave you this question before I close this sermon tonight. Who is the king or who is the queen over your life? You know the answer to that. And I leave you with that question, and I pray as we ponder on that question, at the end of the day, we will decide, Lord, I would shift from autonomous to a theonomous concept of authority over my life. Leave that to Jesus, and you will live our life with a lesser struggle because you let Him decide for you at the end of the day. God bless you and good evening.